Russell, I've enjoyed speaking to many philosophers, theologians, and when I speak to any given one, I really understand their arguments. Problem is when I begin to think about it, all the arguments are different, the methodologies are different, and oftentimes they're contradictory for people who believe this almost the same thing. That leads to some sort of confusion. I come to you because not only are you a believer, but you come from a rigorous scientific background. So what are the methodologies that allow us to properly approach the question, does God exist?
I think when you ask that sort of question, you might be looking for some kind of evidence which is absolutely knockdown proof. That happens, therefore you must believe in God. It's certainly true that in science there are occasions when things are absolutely clear cut. So-and-so exists, therefore it follows. But even in science, there are situations, particularly if you're dealing with the big questions, like how did the universe begin? How did humans evolve? It's not like that. You can't pin everything on a piece of knockdown evidence. And it's a bit like that with God. What you have to do is to build up a case. So, for example, in science, all of the scientists now believe that the world began with a Big Bang. Mm-hmm. Now, why? Where's the knockdown proof? Well, all the galaxies are moving apart from each other. And the further away the galaxies, the faster they're receding into the distance. So if you run the tape backwards, everything was squashed together at a point. Therefore, a Big Bang took place. No. Because when that was the only piece of evidence, there were many people who subscribed to a different cosmology, what was called the steady state theory, where, all right, things expanded, but new matter formed and new galaxies were formed. And so the general picture always remained the same. There was no beginning point. So then not everyone was convinced. What then happened was that if there had been a Big Bang, one could argue, well, it would be very violent. There would be a blinding flash of light, and that light must be around in the universe somewhere, cooled down now. And when you look, sure enough, you see it. It's the microwave background radiation.
So multiple pieces of evidence.
So that's the second piece of evidence. And then you say, well, okay, that then is the knockdown piece of evidence. The answer is certainly not. If all you knew was that there was this radiation, there were so many other sources of radiation out there, that wouldn't be proof. But you've now got two pieces of evidence. And in fact, these days we've got 5 or 6 almost independent pieces of evidence. So these days, there's no argument about a Big Bang. But you can't point to a particular point in time and say, well, at that point, everybody was convinced. It just becomes a non-question anymore. And so it's an accumulation of evidence from different sources. Each one of those indications could be knocked down by some ad hoc explanation, which just explains that one thing.
By different hypothesis.
Methods, different hypotheses. But the Big Bang hypothesis explains all 5 in one go. And the theory of evolution is very much like that. You can say, well, there's the fossil record, but there are gaps in the fossil record. Then you say, well, there are anatomical comparisons you can make. You say, yeah, and then you say, well, then there's DNA. So again, you've got several strands, all of which build up the case. Now, that is how I see a belief in God, evidence for God. You look at a whole variety of things. A starting fact, for example, with the fact that there is a universe. Why is there something rather than nothing? Answer, God. Well, not everybody's convinced by that. Then you say, okay, well, just look at this universe. It seems to be fine-tuned for life. If you just threw together laws of nature at random, you wouldn't have life. The chance of getting life would be virtually 0. So that could, but then someone comes along and says, yes, but you could have lots of universities all run and do, so you could knock that one off. But then you say, yes, but then what about people's religious experience? They feel that they're talking to someone, answers to prayer and things of that kind. The fact that if you give your life to God, there seems to be a pattern starts to develop in your life. Things which didn't make sense in the past seem to be part of an overall.
But if that's the only one you have, I can make lots of psychological and sociological explanations
Absolutely.
with electrical activities in your brain and all sorts of things.
That's right. But the God hypothesis knocks the whole lot down in one go. So it's a question of the evidence being persuasive rather than knocked down. And I do not see that as being terribly different to the way things are in my life as a scientist.
Would it be a fair question to ask you to compare the 5 or 6 arguments to demonstrate the Big Bang and the 5, 6, or however many arguments or methods of explanation to affirm your belief in God, as to which are the stronger?
I think the problem is, you see, that although there are these similarities, there is a big difference, namely that some of these, the evidences for God, are subjective.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
I can tell you that I never feel alone. Now, if when you're on a mountain top and no one is, you feel alone, then you don't know what I'm talking about.
I feel alone. There's a lot of people around.
Yes, you can do that. So, part of the evidence, and in fact, I would say the most important evidence is subjective. But the fact that it's subjective doesn't make it, for me, any the less real. Like, for example, I love my wife. Now, suppose you said, okay, Russell, prove to me that you love your wife. Now, how can I do that? I can say, well, we have good sex together. What does that prove? You could, enjoy sex on your own, sort of thing. So I say, well, I do the washing up for her. Well, what does that prove? That's just part of a contract. She does the cooking. You don't know, and everything that I brought up, you could knock them all down
Independently.
Independently, you could knock them all down because it's a subjective. But I know, not I believe, I know that I love my wife. And the fact that I can't convince you because you don't have that experience doesn't alter the fact that it is real and it is true. Now, I feel that about my belief in God. I know I'm not alone. Now, unless you experience the same thing yourselves, you haven't a clue what I'm talking about.